Welcome to the opening drive, brought to you by FantasyFootballJournal.com. We give you the tools you need to dominate.
Welcome to another playoff edition of the opening drive. I'm Andrew Garda. With me, as always, is Jeff Hoffman. J. Charles Johnson couldn't be here due to scheduling conflict, but Jeff and I are going to be here and give you as much help as we can to make sure that each playoff week is another playoff victory. We're going to talk about a couple of players who may be the difference between you advancing in your next round and possibly getting left home and watching, you're watching from your couch anyway, but watching from your fantasy couch. So we're going to start with a guy who was cold this week in his return. He was a little bit hotter earlier in the season when he was possibly in some trouble with the league, but Travis Henry came back this past weekend, and Jeff, it's just one game, but it looks like Selvin Young is the running back in Denver to have.
Yeah, this is a major problem for Travis Henry owners, and I think Selvin Young owners too. You look at it on the one hand, you say, well, Travis Henry's had 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. That's great. Well, no, that's not really the production you're looking for, because in fantasy, you really want to count on yardage and touchdowns. The fact that he's only getting limited touches right now versus Selvin Young really makes me concerned about whether either of these guys can be a start in your fantasy playoffs, because you don't know what you're going to get week to week.
Well, Selvin Young got a nice 17 carries. Travis Henry only got 10. The biggest problem for me is he did a lot less in a lot of respects than with Selvin Young. Henry did get a touchdown. It saved his fantasy value, but you have to be a little concerned going forward. On the other hand, as we've mentioned in previous broadcasts, you know, the Denver Broncos have a really nice schedule for your playoffs. They're up against Houston this coming week. That's 23rd against the run. Then they're up against San Diego for the championship game. There are better matchups, but 19th against the run. Jeff, you know, my opinion is, in this case, that you go with Selvin Young if you can. If you have Travis Henry, this guy is no more than a flex or a number 2 running back at best week to week.
Yeah, Travis Henry right now is a very risky proposition. Selvin Young is safer because he's getting a decent amount of catches, but he's not getting touchdowns. So you have to count on him having huge yardage to really be productive. I think both of these guys should be on your fantasy bench if you have a viable option, because the playoffs are too big of a risk to take a flyer on these guys. Now, if you've got nothing else and they're your only options, then roll them out there, but don't expect that much as they share carries.
All right, moving on to another guy. We're going to switch positions, the quarterback, and we're going to talk about another Bronco in Jay Cutler. Jay's had an up and down season, an up and down schedule. He rebounded actually from the week before last, which is a horrific showing. And this past week, he had 244 yards and 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. It may not happen often to have those 4 touchdowns, but this season, even though he's been a little up and down, as you know, showcased the week before last, he's basically been pretty reliable. How do you feel about going with him for the rest of your fantasy playoffs?
Well, for your fantasy playoffs, he is a little risky proposition because I wish he was a little more consistent. That being said, he is putting enough points, even in his bad weeks, to be a decent quarterback. This past week, he probably won a lot of fantasy owners their matchup. So you have to be excited about his prospects. I think what you have to really be excited about looking ahead is next year in redraft leagues and also in keeper and dynasty leagues. This guy looks like he's on the verge of becoming a really great quarterback, and they surround him with a lot of good talent in Denver.
Well, Brandon Marshall certainly is having a breakout season. And Javon Walker, I think he'll come back next season
year,
and he'll be just as good as before. Doesn't matter who's running the ball, as we were just talking about. They are able to run the ball when they need to. Cutler has the tools to succeed. Now, the next 2 games, he plays Houston and then San Diego in the championship game. They're 15th and 14th against the pass, respectively. Those are not perfect situations, but they're not the best defenses on the planet. If you need to go with him, I think you can with confidence. However, you have to be cautious. Don't overthink the situation. But then again, Jeff, as we've had Campbell go down now for probably the season, Rex Grossman, Lord knows you can't put Kyle Orton in your fantasy lineup. At this point, there are a lot of owners who may have to depend on Jay Cutler, although I feel confident that they should be all right the next few weeks.
Yeah, he's not a bad option.
All right. Our last guy we're going to talk about We've given love and had discussions about Maurice Jones-Drew before. We're going to go to the other side of the running back by committee and talk about Fred Taylor. I almost said fragile Freddie Taylor. Not so fragile this year. Playing fairly well, and now has had 3 weeks in a row over 100 yards. He's had 2 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, and he had a huge game this weekend, 132 yards on the ground, 24 in the air, and a touchdown. You know, he had an 80-yard run as his capper. He still seemed to have some legs.
Oh, he definitely does. He and Maurice Jones-Drew both benefit from this situation because they don't get tired. They're both healthy. They're both strong. And they're such different running backs that it's really hard for the defense to key on stopping one of them. In the particular 80-yard play, he just basically bowled through the middle of the line, whereas Maurice Jones-Drew is more of a dancer. And I mean that in as masculine a way as it can be, Andrew. He's a masculine dancer. In any event, Fred Taylor's doing a great job of busting through the line. The Jaguars are committed to the run. So this is a situation where both of these guys, if you had both of them, I could say you could even start both of them and be pretty confident.
Well, that sort of thing's a roll of the dice. As we saw this weekend, Chester Taylor and Adrian Peterson, normally a duo you can do that with. Not this week. Adrian Peterson having a very bad day. Not that you should freak out if you're an Adrian Peterson owner. He'll bounce back. But the fact of the matter is in fantasy playoffs, that could be a very risky way to do things.
Well, but there's a lot of owners this past week that I know lost because of Adrian Peterson.
Right, and absolutely. That's what happens if you're starting Chester Taylor and Adrian Peterson. You have one good running back this week and one not so good running back. Same thing with Fred Taylor and MJD. MJD has been up and down this season. He does have home run ability, but he does not seem to be able to do it on a week-to-week basis. Fred Taylor is putting up very good yards week in, week out. I am confident with this guy as your number 2 or flex running back. I don't know that I really want to suggest him as a number 1 unless you're dealing with injury issues. He has a very tough matchup this coming week against the Steelers, but he has a wonderful, perfect fantasy football matchup for championship week, which is the Oakland Raiders, Jeff.
Couldn't get any better than that on championship week. So Fred Taylor looks like he's going to be a risky proposition this week against the Steelers. Still a startable player, but if you make it to the championship round, it'd be hard to put him on your bench.
Absolutely. So that's going to do it for this edition of the playoff opening drive. For Jeff Hoffman, the absent J. Charles Johnson, I'm Andrew Garda. We hope when we see you again next week, you're getting ready for your championship game, and we're going to help you win that title. Have a good weekend.